It was a Tuesday morning when Nathan Hale, the CEO of Hale Tech Systems, looked up from his third espresso and narrowed his eyes at the clock. 8:42 a.m. 12 minutes late again. He didn't even need to check the name. He already knew who it was. Daniel Brooks. Nathan stood and strode across the sleek glass floor of the top level, his Italian shoes barely making a sound. Through the glass wall that overlooked the office, he could see the employees below, hunched over desks, typing away. And then there he was, Daniel, slipping in quietly, his button-down slightly wrinkled, hair a little messy, face pale with tension. It was the third time this month. Nathan tapped twice on the glass, a quiet signal to his assistant. Within moments Daniel received the dreaded Slack ping, "Come to the 30th floor, now." Daniel's heart sank. He knew it was coming. He had barely slept last night again. Emily had another asthma attack at 2 a.m., and the inhaler had run out. He'd driven 20 minutes to the nearest 24-hour pharmacy and stayed by her side until her breathing evened out. He'd set the alarm, but his body had betrayed him, and now he was about to lose the only job that was keeping them afloat. The elevator ride to the top floor felt like being lifted into judgment. Daniel adjusted his collar and tried to smooth out the wrinkles with his palm. His eyes stung, and he hoped Nathan wouldn't notice. When the elevator doors opened, Nathan was already waiting. "Mr. Brooks," Nathan said curtly, "come in." The office was as cold as its owner, sleek, minimalistic, walls lined with awards. Daniel sat across from Nathan, whose expression was unreadable. "I warned you twice already," Nathan began, folding his hands. "We have a start time, 8:30, not 8:35, not 8:42. "I know," Daniel replied quickly, "and I'm truly sorry." "My daughter," Nathan held up a hand. "We've been down this road. I understand people have lives, but when personal issues begin to impact a team..." Daniel's voice cracked, desperation leaking through. "She had trouble breathing. I had to. You could have planned better," Nathan snapped, "or arranged backup. We are not running a charity. Mr. Brooks, I built this company with people who show up, rain or shine." Silence filled the room like fog. Daniel clenched his jaw and nodded. "Understood." Nathan took a breath. "I'm sorry, but I have to let you go." There it was, the sentence that shattered the floor beneath him. Daniel left the office, numb. He walked past his co-workers, some confused, some sympathetic, and rode the elevator down to the lobby without speaking. He stepped outside into the grey morning air, blinking against the rising sun. He couldn't think about the rent, or groceries, or the medical bills. All he could think about was Emily, and how to explain to her that Daddy didn't have a job anymore. If this story already has your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more real feeling stories like this. There's so much more ahead, trust me, you'll want to hear it. The sun was already high by the time Daniel walked into the apartment, his shoulders heavy with the weight of shame. He closed the door behind him quietly, careful not to wake Emily if she was still asleep. But he didn't have to wonder long. "Daddy," her tiny voice came from the couch, soft and warm, like a morning song. She was sitting up, still wrapped in her blanket, her hair tangled from a restless night. Her inhaler sat on the coffee table next to a glass of water. "Hey, sweetheart," Daniel said, forcing a smile. He dropped his bag by the door and knelt beside her, brushing the curls from her forehead. "You're home early." "Yeah," he said, pausing. "I took the rest of the day off." Emily looked at him with her usual blend of innocence and sharp intuition. "Did your boss get mad again?" Daniel hesitated. He never lied to her, not outright. But there were truths she didn't need to carry at 6 years old. "Kind of," he said, adjusting her blanket. "But it's going to be okay." She tilted her head. "Are you still going to work there?" Daniel swallowed hard. "No, baby, not anymore." Emily was quiet for a long moment, then reached out and wrapped her small arms around his neck. "It's okay, Daddy. You always find a way." Daniel held her tighter than he meant to. She had no idea how close he was to breaking. Later that night, after he made grilled cheese and let her watch cartoons a little longer than usual, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open and brows furrowed. He had saved just enough for maybe 3 weeks of expenses. If nothing came in by then, they'd have to start cutting back even more. He refreshed the job board again and again. Most roles in his field were in other cities, bigger cities where relocation would cost money he didn't have. And even If he applied tonight, interviews could take weeks. He rubbed his eyes. At the corner of the table sat a stack of unopened envelopes, medical bills, rent notices. A bright red final warning stamped on one. The kind of reality you can't ignore forever. Meanwhile, on the 30th floor of Haletech, Nathan Hale sat alone in his office. Long after most of the staff had left, he wasn't usually the kind to linger, but something felt off. He glanced at the corner of his desk where Daniel's HR file still sat. For some reason, he hadn't shredded it yet. He opened it again. Inside was the standard stuff: performance reviews, tardy reports, emergency contact forms. But then, he saw something that made him pause. It was a note from Daniel's original interview, over a year ago. A line scribbled by the hiring manager: widowed, sole caregiver to daughter 5. Strong technical background, great under pressure. Nathan blinked. He hadn't remembered that part. He'd been so focused on metrics, deadlines, hours, output that he'd missed the reality behind the employee. A man showing up every day, carrying more than just a backpack. Nathan leaned back in his chair. Suddenly, 12 minutes late didn't seem so egregious. The next morning, Daniel took Emily to school and then rode the bus back home, his mind already in overdrive. He'd sent out 6 applications before 10 a.m., but no responses yet. He checked his phone compulsively. No calls, no interviews, just silence. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. He wasn't expecting anyone. When he opened it, he was surprised to see a man in a dark overcoat, holding a plain white envelope. Daniel Brooks. Yes, I was asked to deliver this to you directly from Haletech. Before Daniel could ask anything more, the man turned and walked off. He opened the envelope right there in the hallway. Inside was a handwritten note. I need to see you today. Please come to the 30th floor at 4 p.m. Hale. Daniel stood frozen. What could this mean? Was it another HR formality? Legal follow-up? A cruel afterthought? Still, he had nothing to lose. At 3:40 p.m., he was already in the lobby, heart thudding in his chest. This time, there was no company badge, no ID scan, just a polite nod from the security guard and the echoing ride back up the glass elevator. When the doors opened, Nathan was standing at his desk, hands in his pockets, looking unusually unsure of himself. I appreciate you coming, he said quietly. Daniel nodded, not quite ready to speak. I owe you an apology, Nathan said, and maybe more than that. Nathan gestured to the same chair Daniel had sat in just 2 days before. Ronley. This time, the room didn't feel like a courtroom. It felt quieter, more human. Daniel took the seat slowly, not sure what to expect. His hands gripped the edge of the chair. I made a mistake, Nathan began. I've spent the last 2 days thinking about what happened, about how I handled it. Daniel said nothing. His body was tense, defensive. He wasn't ready to be humbled. Not again. Nathan sighed, rubbing his temple. I didn't remember. He admitted that you were a single father, that you lost your wife, that every time you walked into this office late, you were probably choosing between your daughter's health and your job. Daniel's breath caught. Something softened, almost unwillingly, in his chest. I never wanted to make excuses, Daniel said. Finally, I know it's a business. I knew what I was risking every time I walked through those doors late, but I never stopped trying. Not once. I believe that, Nathan said, meeting his eyes. They sat in silence for a moment. I can't take back what I did, Nathan continued, but I want to try to make it right. Daniel frowned slightly. What do you mean? I want to offer you your job back. The words hit harder than Daniel expected, but instead of relief, his stomach tightened. It's not that simple, he said quietly. You can't just erase what happened. I'm not asking you to pretend it didn't, Nathan said, but I realized I fired a man I didn't truly understand, and that's on me. Daniel looked down at his hands. The calluses were fading, but they still told the story of years spent juggling work and fatherhood, grief and survival. My daughter, he started, then hesitated. She asked me if I still had a job. She's 6. She shouldn't have to worry about that. Nathan nodded. You don't have to answer me now. Just think about it. Take the weekend. He slid a folder across the table. Inside was a revised contract with a slight pay bump, an updated job title, and a line that caught Daniel completely off guard. Remote flexibility granted upon request. Daniel's eyes lifted. I want to build a company that makes room for life, Nathan said. not one that punishes people for living it. Daniel walked out of the building slowly, the folder tucked under his arm like a secret. The world looked different, not because it had changed, but because someone had finally seen him clearly. That night, he tucked Emily into bed and sat beside her until her breathing grew slow and steady. Then he opened his laptop. He didn't go to the job boards this time. He opened the contract again, reread every word, every line. There was still a pit in his stomach. He'd never forgotten what it felt like to be disposable. But this felt like the beginning of something different. Meanwhile, Nathan sat at home, staring at a photo frame he hadn't touched in years. It held a picture of a boy, maybe 4 years old, smiling with missing teeth, standing beside a woman whose eyes mirrored his own. Nathan's ex-wife had moved states away years ago, taking their son with her. The court hearings had been long, bitter, expensive. Nathan had buried himself in work ever since. Deadlines, performance reviews, quarterly reports. They were safer than heartache, cleaner than regret. But firing Daniel had dug something up, something he hadn't expected. A mirror. The next morning, Nathan typed a name into his phone. He stared at the contact for a long time before pressing call. It rang 3 times. Then a small, sleepy voice answered. "Hi." "Hey, buddy," Nathan said softly, throat tightening. "It's Dad." On Sunday morning, Daniel took Emily to the park. It was a small thing, just a walk, a few giggles, a push on the swings. But it felt like breathing after days underwater. As he sat on the bench watching her chase pigeons, he thought about the offer again. It wasn't just a job, it was acknowledgement. A crack in the wall that had stood between survival and dignity. "Daddy," Emily called, waving from the top of the slide. "Look at me." "I see you, baby," Daniel called back, smiling. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel invisible. Monday morning came with overcast skies and the quiet hum of rain tapping the window. Daniel sat at the kitchen table in silence, the offer letter still open on his laptop. It had been 48 hours since Nathan gave it to him, and he'd read it so many times he knew it by heart. Emily, still in her pajamas, was drawing with crayons on the floor nearby. Every now and then she looked up at him, her tiny brows furrowed in that same way her mother used to when she was deep in thought. Daniel turned toward her. "Hey, Em." She looked up, her eyes curious. "What would you think if Daddy went back to his old job?" She stopped coloring. "The one where the man got mad?" "Yeah, that one." She tilted her head, considering. "Is it the one where you have to leave really early and come home really tired?" Daniel laughed softly. "That one." Emily thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. "As long as you're not too tired to read bedtime stories." He felt the corners of his eyes sting. At 9 a.m. sharp, Daniel stood once again in the gleaming lobby of Heltec. The receptionist gave a polite nod, slightly warmer than usual, and called up to the 30th floor. Within minutes, Nathan appeared. At the elevator, no assistant, no clipboard, just him. Daniel extended his hand. "I've thought about it. I'd like to come back." Nathan didn't hesitate. He took Daniel's hand firmly, looked him in the eye, and nodded. "Welcome back." But as they stood there, shaking hands in the quiet lobby, Daniel added, "On one condition." Nathan raised a brow. "You keep building the company you mentioned, the one that makes room for life." Nathan smiled, not the usual polite corporate smile, but something more real. "Deal." That week passed in a blur. Daniel eased back into his role, picking up tasks as if he'd never left. But things felt different. His teammates welcomed him with small nods and quiet pats on the back. Even Sarah from accounting left a post-it on his monitor that read, "Glad you're back. You were missed." But the biggest change wasn't in the people, it was in Nathan. He walked the floor more often now, not just to check progress but to ask questions, to learn. He lingered at desks, made eye contact, remembered people's names. It was subtle, but noticeable. Midweek, Daniel noticed something strange, a closed-door meeting in conference room B, with a whiteboard that read, "Life Balance Initiative, Pilot Program." He saw Nathan inside, speaking to a few department heads, including HR. He wasn't just making promises. He was trying, and that mattered. On Thursday, as Daniel was wrapping up his day, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Hi, this is Grace Hale, Nathan's ex-wife. He said you might be okay to talk." Daniel frowned, surprised. He typed back, "Hi, sure, everything okay?" A moment later the reply came. He's been calling Jake every night, just wanted to say, thank you. Whatever you said, it made a difference. Daniel stared at the screen, caught off guard by the sudden rush of emotion. He hadn't done anything special, just shown up as himself. And somehow, that small, painful moment had created ripples bigger than he realized. That night, Emily fell asleep. Earlier than usual, her little hand curled around his pinky as he read the last page of Goodnight Moon. He didn't move right away, just stayed there, listening to her breathing steady, strong. He thought about what Nathan had said, about rebuilding the company, about regrets. Maybe it wasn't just about second chances, maybe it was about first real ones. Across town, Nathan sat in his study, flipping through an old notebook where he'd once mapped out the early vision of Haltech. He stopped at a page labeled Team Core Values. Most of it was corporate jargon from years ago, but at the bottom, in his own handwriting, it read, People First. He stared at it for a long time. He had forgotten, but now he remembered. The next morning, Daniel arrived at work just before 8:30. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like he was chasing something. He felt steady, grounded, and when he opened his email, the first message waiting was from Nathan. Subject, idea, story night body. Thinking of hosting a monthly event where people share personal stories, not for productivity, just connection. Would you be open to sharing yours someday? Daniel leaned back in his chair. He wasn't sure yet, but maybe. Someday. Daniel didn't answer Nathan's email right away. The thought of standing in front of co-workers, strangers really, and laying bare his story felt too raw, too exposed, but the idea lingered. That Friday, as the office buzzed with the usual end-of-week energy, Daniel noticed something different. People were talking more, smiling more, not because of productivity wins or quarterly goals, but because something had shifted. At 4 p.m., the internal calendar pinged with a new invite. Story night, Thursday at 6 p.m., too optional but bring your heart. Nathan had gone through with it. Daniel hesitated, his cursor hovering over accept. Then, slowly, he clicked it. That night at home, Emily sat cross-legged on the living room floor, building a puzzle. She looked up as Daniel entered the room. You look happy today, she said simply. Daniel chuckled. I guess I do. Did the man at your job stop being mean? Daniel thought about it. I don't think he was ever really mean, just lost. Emily looked confused. How do grown-ups get lost? They have phones. Daniel sat beside her, running a hand through her curls. Sometimes it's not the kind of lost you can see on a map. She blinked up at him, then nodded, with the kind of seriousness only kids could pull off. Then it's a good thing you helped him find his way. Daniel smiled, the truth of it settling somewhere deep inside. The following Thursday came fast. By 6 p.m. the usual office lights had dimmed, and conference room A had been transformed. There were beanbags and folding chairs, a tray of coffee and soft pastries, and a makeshift stage, just a stool with a standing lamp. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm. About 20 employees showed up. A few sat quietly in the back. Others clustered in small groups, laughing nervously. Nathan stood by the door, greeting each person personally. When Daniel arrived, he made eye contact with Nathan, who gave him a small, understanding nod. No pressure, no expectations. The first speaker was Sarah from accounting. She shared a short, funny story about her dog getting skunked the night before her wedding. The room laughed. The tension softened. Then came Jake from it, a quiet guy no one knew well, who tearfully talked about his brother's overdose and how work had become his anchor through grief. People listened, not to fix, just to witness. And then Nathan stood. He looked around the room, cleared his throat, and began. I started this company after a divorce and a custody battle. I poured everything into it, money, time, myself. I thought if I could make something successful, I wouldn't feel like I'd failed at everything else. But in the process, I forgot the one thing that actually mattered, people. A few weeks ago, I fired someone for being late. What I didn't know was that he was late because he was keeping his daughter alive. I didn't ask, I didn't care. I just saw numbers, and I was wrong. But he gave me a second chance. Not just to fix a mistake, but to become a better man. Nathan paused. His voice had cracked slightly, and he didn't bother to hide it. He reminded me that this company started with a vision, to build something human. I think I lost sight of that, and I want to thank him. He turned, meeting Daniel's gaze. Across the room, Daniel, you saved more than your job. You saved the soul of this place." There was no applause, just a quiet, collective stillness. Then, Nathan stepped down, and without planning to, Daniel stood up. "I wasn't going to talk," Daniel began, his voice steady but soft. "I didn't think I had anything to offer that mattered to anyone here." He scanned the room. Every eye was on him, but it didn't feel threatening. It felt safe. "When my wife passed, I didn't know how I was going to raise Emily alone. I didn't know how to work full-time, pay for rent, and still make her feel like she had both parents. There were nights I didn't sleep. Mornings I was late because she couldn't breathe. But I kept showing up, and when I got fired, I thought, maybe I was failing her too." Daniel took a breath, the lump in his throat pushed against every word. "But what I learned is that showing up isn't always neat or perfect. Sometimes it's late, sometimes it's messy, but it counts, it matters." He looked over at Nathan, especially when someone sees it. The room remained still, then someone clapped, then another, and soon, the room filled with applause, not loud or performative, just real. As the night ended, Daniel found himself talking to co-workers who'd never spoken to him before. People shared their own stories, fears about sick parents, hidden anxieties, missed milestones. Nathan approached with 2 cups of lukewarm coffee. He handed one to Daniel. "That was brave," Nathan said. Daniel shrugged, felt necessary. They stood there in companionable silence. Nathan looked at him. "You've changed this place more than you know." Daniel glanced around, at the room, at the people, at the warmth growing in a space that had once been all glass and tension. "Maybe," he said, "but I think it wanted to change already. It just needed a reason." If this part moved you, take a second to like the video or leave a comment. It truly helps us reach more hearts. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. We're only halfway through, and the most emotional turns are yet to come. The next Monday, Daniel woke up before the alarm. The soft morning light stretched across the bedroom wall, and for the first time in months, he felt rested. Not because he had more hours of sleep, but because the weight on his chest had lifted. Just a little. Emily was already stirring in her room, singing quietly to herself. He could hear her mismatched lyrics floating down the hallway. "Good morning, sunshine. Hello, toast. Where's my socks? I love you most." Daniel smiled to himself. He moved through the morning with a new rhythm, packing Emily's lunch, brushing her hair while she told him about her dreams, walking her to the school gate with a juice box in one hand and her favorite purple backpack bouncing behind her. Then came the walk to the bus stop. But this time, it wasn't with dread. He didn't feel like a man crawling his way back into a system that didn't care. He felt like someone being welcomed home. Back at Heltec, things had shifted subtly but undeniably. There was a new sign on the break room wall, "Human First," printed in clean, simple font, surrounded by sticky notes, where employees had started leaving little pieces of themselves. "My dad's cancer is in remission. I'm finally sleeping better. I showed my wife my artwork for the first time." The company culture wasn't perfect. It was still a tech company in a hyper-sure industry. But now, it had corners for breathing, moments for reflection, small spaces where people could bring more than just their resumes. Daniel returned to his desk to find a small envelope with his name on it. Inside was a note written in blue ink. "Thanks for going first. Jasmine, HRIT." Was strange how powerful those words felt. Later that afternoon, Daniel was called into a brainstorming session with Nathan and a few department leads. It was supposed to be a regular strategy meeting, but halfway through the session, the conversation took a turn. "We've been tracking employee turnover for the past 5 years, Jasmine said, pointing at the chart on the screen. "And we always blamed it on market shifts or workload. But it's not that simple. People leave when they feel invisible," Daniel said, almost without thinking. Everyone looked at him. He continued, "It's not just about compensation. It's about dignity. About being seen when they're struggling, not just when they're producing." Nathan nodded slowly. "Then let's figure out how to build that in. Not just as a perk, as a principle." A few days later, Daniel found himself staying late, not because he was overwhelmed, but because he was inspired. He was drafting a proposal for a mentorship program, something to connect younger employees with those who had life experience, not just technical expertise, people who had failed, fallen, gotten up again, people like him. And the weirdest part, he wasn't doing it for recognition. He didn't even put his name on the draft. He just wanted to give back what had been given to him. That evening, while Waiting for the bus, Daniel's phone buzzed again. A number he recognized now. "Hi," came the voice on the other end. "This is Grace, Nathan's ex." Daniel smiled. "Hi, again. I don't mean to bother you," she said, "but Jake wanted to ask if you might want to come to his soccer game this weekend. Nathan's going to. He just didn't know how to ask." Daniel's heart paused for a beat. "I'd love to," he said. Saturday morning came crisp and blue. Daniel and Emily arrived at the soccer field just as the game began. Kids in oversized jerseys ran wildly after the ball, laughter echoing in the air. Nathan stood near the sideline, hands in his coat pockets, smiling in that nervous, quiet way fathers sometimes do when they're trying to bridge time lost. Jake ran across the field, glanced up, and waved when he saw both of them, Nathan and Daniel, standing together. Emily cheered from the grass. "Go, Jake." Daniel looked over at Nathan. "He's good." Nathan laughed. "He's relentless." They stood there together, two men shaped by different kinds of grief and guilt, watching a boy chase joy across the grass. For once, there were no boardrooms, no deadlines, just wind, sky, and the healing echo of children's voices. After the game, as the sun began to dip low, Daniel and Emily walked home. She held his hand, swinging it back and forth like a pendulum. "Did you like the game?" he asked. "Yeah," she grinned. "Jake's nice. I think he likes having you around." Daniel raised a brow. "Oh yeah, what makes you say that?" "Because when you smiled at him, he smiled bigger." Daniel didn't answer. He just squeezed her hand gently. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive in grand gestures or perfect words. Sometimes it just arrives on sidelines, in silence, in second chances. A week later, Daniel found himself sitting at his desk during lunch, staring at an old photograph he kept tucked away in his wallet. It was from 5 years ago. His wife Anna, holding newborn Emily in a hospital bed, both of them lit by soft morning light. Anna's eyes were tired, but her smile, it glowed. He hadn't looked at that photo in months, maybe a year. Life had moved forward, dragging him with it. But grief didn't follow the rules of time. It curled and faded and circled back in waves, sometimes soft, sometimes sharp. Daniel traced his thumb across the edge of the photo. His chest tightened, but not with the crushing grief he once knew. This time, it felt full, not just of loss, but of everything he had survived since. The photo had been a goodbye for so long. Now it felt like a bridge. That same afternoon, Nathan stopped by his desk. "No meetings today," he said casually. "Thought we might grab coffee." Daniel blinked, a little surprised. Now Nathan shrugged. "Why not?" They ended up at a quiet cafe 2 blocks from the office. A small place with mismatched chairs, chalkboard menus, and a barista who somehow remembered everyone's name. Daniel ordered a simple black coffee. Nathan chose something with oat milk and lavender syrup. They sat by the window in silence for a moment before Nathan spoke. "I've been thinking about mentorship." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "My draft." Nathan nodded. "It's good. More than good, actually. It's personal without being too sentimental, and it fills a real gap we've had." He sipped his coffee, then added, "But I want you to lead it." Daniel froze. "Me? Yes. I want this to be more than a side project. I want it to be part of the company culture, something permanent." Daniel looked out the window. People passed by in coats and scarves, bundled against the crisp air. So much had changed, and yet everything outside looked the same. "I'm not a manager," he said. Nathan shook his head. "You're something better. You're trusted." That word landed hard. Trusted. Daniel had spent years just trying to prove he was capable. He never expected to be trusted. "I'll think about it," he said. "Of course," Nathan replied. No pressure. But Daniel already knew he would say yes. That weekend, Nathan invited Daniel and Emily over for dinner. It wasn't formal. Just homemade pasta, garlic bread, and mismatched plates. Jake was there too. Shy at first, but quickly warming up, once Emily taught him how to fold a napkin into a swan. After dinner, the kids watched cartoons on the couch while Nathan and Daniel stood by the window with glasses of tea. "I don't know what kind of dad I am," Nathan admitted, voice low. "You're showing up," Daniel said. "That counts for a lot." Nathan glanced at him. "You think that's enough?" Daniel thought about all the nights he'd sat by Emily's bed, unsure if he was doing anything right. All the mornings he'd packed lunchboxes with shaking hands, terrified of failing her. "No," he said, "but it's where you start." Later that night, as Daniel and Emily were walking home, Emily asked, "Is Jake going to be my cousin?" Daniel chuckled. "No, sweetie, that's not how it works." She looked up, curious. "But you like Mr. Nathan, right?" Daniel paused. The cool evening air brushed against his face. "I respect him," he said, "and I think he's becoming someone worth knowing." Emily was quiet for a moment, then said, "That's good. He needs people." Daniel looked down at her. "Why do you say that?" "Because he looks lonely, like how you used to look before you came home early that day." Daniel smiled softly. Children saw things adults didn't, or maybe they just weren't afraid to say them. At work, Daniel began building the mentorship program slowly. He named it Bridge. Simple, honest. It started with 3 pairs, then 5, then 10. People from different departments, different walks of life, connecting for 1 hour a week, just to talk about stress, about parenting, about grief, about resilience, no productivity, goals, no performance metrics, just people. He didn't lead it with lectures. He led it by showing up, with stories, with vulnerability. And soon, people began to open up in ways Daniel hadn't expected. One day, a young engineer named Mia came to him after her session and said, "I didn't know you could be this honest at work." Daniel smiled. "You always, could we just forgot?" The following month, HaleTech held its first company-wide meeting that wasn't about performance. It was about culture. Nathan stood on the stage with a new slide behind him. "People first isn't a slogan, it's a system." He credited Daniel publicly, by name. Daniel didn't expect the applause, but when it came, it didn't feel hollow. It felt earned. And when the meeting ended, Nathan stepped off the stage, walked straight to Daniel, and shook his hand. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not giving up on us, even when I did." Daniel looked him in the eye. "You gave me a second chance. I just returned the favor." Later that night, Daniel found an old voicemail on his phone, one he had saved but never played again. It was Anna's voice, soft and bright. "Hey love, just wanted to say, you're doing better than you think. I know it's hard, but you're stronger than you believe. And Emily, she's going to be okay, because she has you." Daniel sat in the quiet, tears tracing slowly down his cheeks. She had been right. Emily was okay, and somehow, so was he. The air was thick with the warmth of early spring when Daniel walked into HaleTech one Thursday morning and noticed something unusual. The front desk, typically quiet this early, was abuzz with murmured voices. The receptionist, Olivia, glanced up at him and offered a tight smile. "There's a visitor waiting for you," she said. "For me?" She nodded and gestured toward the corner of the lobby. Daniel followed her gaze and froze. A man stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, dressed in a tailored suit that looked like it belonged in a boardroom to cities over. Daniel hadn't seen that face in over 6 years. It was his brother, Mark Brooks, older by 3 years, a financial consultant, polished, sharp-tongued, and someone Daniel hadn't spoken to since Anna's funeral. The rift hadn't been sudden, but slow, eroded by arguments, silence, and 2 completely different views on what it meant to live a good life. Mark had offered to take Emily in temporarily after Anna passed, citing Daniel's unstable work hours and lack of long-term planning. It had been dressed as concern, but it came out like a verdict. Daniel never forgave him, but here he was, standing in his lobby like no time had passed at all. "Mark," Daniel said, approaching with cautious steps. Mark turned, his expression unreadable. "You look well." Daniel crossed his arms. "Wish I could say the same." "What are you doing here?" "I was in town for a client," Mark said, gesturing vaguely. "And I heard about your role here, the mentorship program, the recognition. Thought I'd stop by." Daniel blinked. "Why now?" Mark sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Because I didn't know how to before, and maybe I was wrong about a lot." Daniel remained quiet. Mark continued. "When you lost Anna, I thought you'd fall apart. I was waiting for it, honestly, but you didn't. You held on. You raised Emily, and apparently, you're changing companies now too." Daniel studied his brother's face. The pride there looked real and hesitant, the kind of pride someone feels when they're not sure they deserve to feel it. "I didn't need you to believe in me back then," Daniel said quietly, "but I needed you to at least not doubt me." Mark's eyes lowered. "I know." Silence hung between them. "Do you want to grab lunch?" Mark asked after a moment. "Maybe. Try again." Daniel didn't answer right away, but eventually, he nodded. Yeah, let's talk. That lunch wasn't easy. There were long pauses and conversations that circled old wounds, but there was also laughter, real, cautious laughter over shared childhood stories, and a ridiculous way Mark used to tie his shoes. They spoke about Emily, about Anna, about how Daniel had nearly given up more than once but hadn't, and when they left the restaurant, Mark clapped a hand on Daniel's shoulder. I'm proud of you, little brother. Daniel looked at him, surprised at how much he needed to hear that. Back at Heltec, the Bridge mentorship program was thriving. They had just passed the 3-month milestone, and Daniel was preparing a quiet celebration. Coffee, cupcakes, handwritten thank you cards for each mentor and mentee. Nothing flashy, just real. Nathan stopped by as Daniel was setting up. You ever think about taking this beyond Heltec? He asked. Daniel looked up. What do you mean? I mean, consulting, workshops. Other companies need this too. You've built something that speaks to people's lives. Daniel blinked. I don't know. I'm not exactly the TED Talk type. Nathan chuckled. You don't need a spotlight. Just keep telling the truth. Daniel didn't say anything, but the idea rooted itself somewhere deep. That night, Daniel stood at the sink washing dishes while Emily colored at the kitchen table. Her voice broke the silence. Daddy, if Mommy could see us now, do you think she'd be proud? Daniel paused, water running over his hands. He turned to her, a soft smile forming. I think she's proud every single day. Emily beamed, and then, completely satisfied, returned to her drawing. Daniel dried his hands, leaned down, and kissed the top of her head. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was living. A few days later, something happened that reminded him of just how far he'd come. Daniel received an email from someone named Lena Harwell, the CEO of a mid-sized company in Boston. She'd heard about Bridge from a former Heltec employee who'd relocated. Her email was short. Your program changed the way I see leadership. Would you be open to consulting for our company? Even part-time. We could use your voice. Daniel stared at the message for a long time, not because he didn't believe it, but because, somewhere deep inside, he did, and that was the biggest shift of all. By the following week, Nathan had offered to carve out time in Daniel's schedule 2 Fridays a month to let him consult externally. The company would cover travel. It would even pay him extra. This isn't about reward, Nathan said. It's about ripple. What you started here. The world needs more of it. Daniel nodded slowly, heart racing, but calm. He accepted. That Friday night, he and Emily were curled up on the couch with popcorn and the Iron Giant. At one point, Emily looked up at him, eyes wide. Daddy, yeah, are you gonna be famous now? Daniel laughed. No, sweetheart, just helpful. She smiled and leaned her head against his arm. That's better anyway. Daniel looked down at her, then back at the screen, eyes shining. He couldn't have agreed more. It was early May when Daniel boarded the train to Boston, a worn leather bag slung over his shoulder and his laptop tucked beneath his arm. He sat by the window, watching the trees blur into watercolor smudges of green and gold. Emily had insisted on packing him snacksable slices and pretzels in a pink lunchbox that once had unicorn stickers. As the train hummed toward the city, Daniel felt something unfamiliar bloom in his chest. It wasn't fear, it was possibility. The office of Harwell & Co. was perched in a repurposed warehouse along the harbor, all brick and glass, sunlight spilling across hardwood floors and conference tables, surrounded by half-sipped coffee and worn-out faces. Lena Harwell met him in the lobby. She was in her mid-40s, with sharp eyes and a warmth in her handshake that put him at ease instantly. Thanks for coming, Daniel, she said. Your reputation's outpacing you. Daniel chuckled softly. That's a first. She led him to a quiet room where 15 managers waited, some skeptical, some tired, but all curious. Daniel didn't walk in with a PowerPoint or a suit, 3 sizes too sharp. He brought stories, real ones, of failure, of resilience, of the people in the shadows of office buildings who carry more than they show. He spoke about things most leaders don't: grief, single parenting, shame, healing. And by the end of the session, there wasn't a single pair of arms crossed. Afterward, Lena pulled him aside. We want to bring you back, monthly, if you're willing. Daniel blinked. That's more than I expected. She smiled. It's exactly what we need. Back at the train station, Daniel called Emily. "You'll never guess what just happened," he said. "Did you meet Taylor Swift?" she asked. Dead serious. Daniel burst into laughter. "Not quite. But I might get to come back here every month. You're kinda cool now," she whispered. His eyes watered. "Thanks, baby." By midsummer, Daniel was doing sessions in 3 cities. He never called it consulting. Not really. It felt more like storytelling. He sat in rooms with strangers and let his life be a mirror for theirs. People cried. People hugged him. One woman told him she finally understood her own father after listening to him. And back at Haltech, things didn't slow down. Nathan officially renamed the mentorship initiative to the Bridge Project, expanding it across departments. Daniel's name came up often during leadership meetings, not just as an employee but as a model. One afternoon, Nathan stopped Daniel in the hallway. "Do you ever think about writing a book?" Daniel blinked. "A book?" Nathan nodded. "You've lived what most of us only talk about." Daniel shook his head, overwhelmed. "I don't even know where to begin." Nathan smiled. "Start with why you got up the morning after you got fired." Daniel stood there for a moment, letting the memory settle. Because of Emily. Because she needed him. Because love doesn't clock. It shows up. That night, Daniel sat in front of his laptop after Emily had gone to bed. He stared at the blank document for a long time before finally typing. "The day I lost my job, I thought I had failed as a father. I was wrong. That day was the beginning of everything." He sat back, heart racing. Later that week, Daniel attended a Bridge Project Mixer, a casual event for mentors and mentees to reconnect and reflect. One of the younger employees, Marcus, approached him quietly. "You probably don't remember," Marcus said, "but you talked to me the day after I almost quit. You told me it was okay to be tired, that everyone's holding something heavy." Daniel smiled. "I remember." Marcus's voice cracked. "That kept me here. Just wanted to say thank you." Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. "You kept yourself here, but I'm honored to be part of the story." The ripple effect Nathan had spoken of was real. It wasn't loud or flashy. It was quiet, persistent, like kindness passed between strangers. Daniel started receiving letters, handwritten ones from employees across the country who had read about the Bridge Project or seen his online talks. One said, "You made me realize I'm more than my resume." Another, "After my son's diagnosis, I thought I had to choose between being a good dad and a good worker. Your story helped me believe I can be both." Daniel kept every letter in a shoebox on the top shelf of his closet. One night, while washing dishes, Daniel glanced at the calendar and noticed something that had been exactly 1 year since he'd been fired. A full year since he walked out of that glass office, jobless, humiliated, and scared. He looked around, his kitchen worn but filled with warmth. The fridge was covered in Emily's drawings. A pile of books sat on the table. One of them had his name on the spine, still in manuscript form. But real. Emily ran into the room, still in her pajamas, holding a crumpled paper. "Daddy, look, I made this in class." She held up a drawing, 2 stick figures holding hands under a big sun. Above them, written in her careful second-grade handwriting, "Me and my hero." Daniel's breath caught. He knelt down and pulled her into his arms. "You're my hero too, Emmy." Outside, the streetlights flickered on. Somewhere in the distance, a neighbor's radio played an old song softly through the window. Daniel stood by the window, watching the world go by. He had no idea what was coming next, but for the first time in a long, long while, he wasn't afraid. It was a bright September morning when Daniel stepped onto the stage at the annual Haltech Leadership Summit. He wore a simple navy blazer, no tie, just like always, and as he looked out over the crowd, he couldn't help but smile. Hundreds of employees, leaders, interns, and board members had gathered. Some knew him personally. Many only knew the story. Nathan Hale had introduced him moments earlier with a short, quiet statement. "Sometimes, the person we almost lost becomes the one who helps us find ourselves." Now, the lights warmed his skin, and Daniel's voice reached into the hush. "I wasn't always someone people invited to speak," he began with a half smile. "In fact, about a year ago, I was standing in the same building being fired." Laughter rippled softly through the crowd, but there was weight beneath it. He continued, steady and honest. "I was late, more than once. I was exhausted, overwhelmed, and scared. Not because I didn't care about my work, but because I was caring for someone who needed me more. My daughter, Emily, who was fighting for breath while I was fighting for time." He paused. "I thought losing my job was the end, but it turned out to be the beginning. Because someone dared to ask, not just what I was doing, but why, and that changed everything. After his speech, Daniel stepped off the stage to a standing ovation. It wasn't about praise, it was about connection. People weren't clapping for him, they were clapping for themselves, for the invisible struggles they carried, for the quiet battles they fought every day. Nathan approached him backstage, his eyes more reflective than usual. "She'd be proud of you, you know," Nathan said softly. And Daniel knew exactly who he meant: Nathan's wife, Sarah, the one Daniel never met, but whose absence echoed in so many of their conversations. "I hope so," Daniel replied. "I hope Emily will be too." "She already is," Nathan said. "She tells everyone at the holiday party that her dad fixes grown-up hearts." Daniel chuckled, touched beyond words. That weekend, he and Emily baked a cake together for no special reason. Chocolate, with too much frosting and sprinkles scattered like confetti. As they cleaned up the mess in the kitchen, Emily asked, "Daddy, why do people cry when they talk to you?" Daniel looked down at her, brushing flour from her cheek. "Because sometimes we keep our feelings locked up for too long, and when someone helps us open the door, the tears come out first." Emily thought about it for a moment. "So, you're like a key." Daniel smiled. "Maybe, or maybe I just remind them they're not alone." She nodded, as if that made perfect sense. In the fall, Daniel's book was published, What We Carry. Stories of showing up when it's hard. It wasn't a bestseller by New York standards, but it spread quietly, shared between co-workers, left on desks, passed from hand to hand like a secret. Teachers read it, nurses, parents, CEOs. One chapter told the full story: how Nathan fired him, how he came back, and how forgiveness built something stronger than punishment ever could. Nathan even wrote the foreword. "Leadership isn't about being perfect," he wrote. "It's about what we do after we get it wrong." Daniel never returned to his old title in tech. Instead, HealthTech created a new role just for him, Director of Culture and Human Insight. He spoke at conferences, advised leaders, helped rewrite policies to support working parents and caregivers, and every evening without fail, he made it home in time to read Emily a story. That was the only job that ever really mattered. One snowy evening near Christmas, Daniel and Nathan found themselves standing outside the same office building where it all began. The glass walls sparkled with warm lights inside. Laughter filtered from the annual party upstairs. Nathan held 2 mugs of hot cider, one of which he handed to Daniel. "Strange, isn't it?" Nathan said. "A year ago, we were in that office, and I thought I was doing the right thing by letting you go." Daniel sipped the cider. "Maybe you were. For who you were then." Nathan looked at him, eyes thoughtful. "And who I was then needed to change. I didn't know it until you showed me." Daniel looked out at the snowy street. "Sometimes, people break open," he said quietly, "but if they're willing, they grow back stronger." The 2 men stood there in the cold, no longer boss and employee, just 2 fathers, 2 human beings, learning to lead differently, learning to live better. And in a quiet house on the edge of town, Emily slept soundly under a quilt her grandmother had made years before. The little unicorn lunchbox sat on her bookshelf, still full of crayons and paper scraps. On her nightstand was a book with her father's name on it, and on the last page, beneath the acknowledgements, a single handwritten sentence read, "For Emily, my reason why." If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Every share helps more people find the healing in our stories. Thank you for listening, and remember, you never know what someone is carrying.